back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn Podcast. I am your host, Michael Grace, and today I am really excited because we're talking about JEDIs. Okay, we're kind of talking about JEDIs. We'll explain that a little bit later, but I am joined by Omar Harris. Omar Harris has written a book called Be a JEDI Leader, Not a Boss, Leadership in the Era of Corporate Social Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. He's a former pharmaceutical general manager, Intent Consulting, and Tempo.io founder, motivational speaker. And as I mentioned, that one book is not his only book. He is a best-selling author of several books. He has over 20 years of experience building high-performance organizations on 4 continents, having managed multi-billion-dollar brands and led extensive organizations while working in the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, and the United States. He innovated blueprints for JEDI, J-E-D-I, we'll break that down in just a second, leadership. So leading with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and servant leadership, and 20 team performance acceleration principles, or TRAPs, that can be applied by leaders at all levels of professional experience. Omar, thank you for taking the time and joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. Really happy to be here with you today.
I love that the swirl of your books is all around being a great leader in leadership. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you get to be, a knowledge expert on leadership, and then what caused you to say, I need to write a book?
Well, I was always a student of leadership my entire career, coming in, into the pharmaceutical industry in 1998 as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and then kind of working my way up into marketing and then operations and then ultimately general management. I was fascinated by leadership. I wanted to be a good leader whenever I got my own teams and really, because when you work for great leaders, you want to be that way as well. So I think that I had the benefit of working for some great leaders, and they really invested in helping me become the best version of myself as a leader as well. And so they kind of stoked that curiosity for leadership and really wanted me to be the best version of myself in that regard. So with those two things working together, it was only a matter of time until I dove in, kind of tried to apply things I'd learned from reading like John C. Maxwell and Patrick Lencioni and all these, giants of leadership, and then you realize that, okay, well, the theory is here, but then the practicality is over here, and it's not as easy as it may appear when you read the book. So you have to close that gap. And so in the effort of, I began leading teams back in 2006. And by 2015, I was a general manager of a large organization. And I realized it was time to kind of write books that close those gaps for leaders because, these people have sold millions of books, but the practice of leadership is not changing globally. And probably the reason why is because it's not been made practical enough. So with my first book, Leaderboard, The DNA of High Performance Teams, I endeavored to really make those lessons practical and pragmatic for leaders wanting to implement. And then with the second book, it was really more about a treaty. Like, listen, this is a divisor of water. Basically, this is kind of like separating the waters, where there was the old version of leadership. Now we have new leadership, modern leadership, and that has to take on a servant leadership path. So just explaining why this is so important as a basis for the brand of leadership that really engages and produces the productivity we need today. And then I saw that, hey, listen, well, if these, injustices and inequities and conformities and exclusionary policies keep lying around, it doesn't matter how good of a leader you are, you're not going to really be able to, once again, meet the modern standard of transparency and trust and collaboration that people expect today. So I had to go back to the grindstone to write another book to kind of build that blueprint for that. So as I live and as I learn and as I collect experience, I try to give that back to my readers. And the difference between me and like I said, the giants is that I'm not coming from a theoretical or ivory tower perspective. I'm someone who did everything I wrote about. So basically, when you read one of my books, you're reading someone who has literally implemented everything he's saying. And so it has the scars to prove it.
I love it. I love one of the key themes through that was we're in modern times, right?
Yeah.
And we're all figuring it out, whether it be hybrid workplaces or managing millennials that have different needs than Gen X or Gen Y.
Mhm.
The workforce is changing. And I love that you recognized that and then said, okay, these principles are great, but they're kind of stale, right? Or they're still practical, but really, I can read all the self help books that I want,
Right.
but it comes down to what do I do with that knowledge, right?
Exactly.
How do I practice it? So I love so much of what you just talked about. I got excited when I saw Jedi leader because I figured we'd have capes and lightsabers, and I was like, that's the kind of leader I want to be. I'm going to jump on an X-wing, and it's going to be awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
But really, talk to me a little bit about Jedi leader. It's a cool, catchy title for sure. But I love when you break down the J, the E, the D, and the I, because those are real world issues like today that we are all struggling with as a society, let alone as a leader.
100%. And so, the credit for the term Jedi in the concept of leadership is not, I did not create that term. It's been around for years, kind of floating around the space. And really, when I encountered the term, I had actually written a throwaway kind of line in the Servant Leaders Manifesto that says, be a Jedi, not a boss. And what I meant when I wrote that was really more about, you don't need positional power to influence. You can influence with just with just by being a great leader, without needing to have like a position or a title. And that's what I meant when I wrote that line. But then I learned that there was a broader and a deeper meaning to the term Jedi that I'd never even contemplated, which was really leaning into the aspects of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion as how you achieve outcomes for more stakeholders. And so I was inspired by I don't know if you've heard of the Business Roundtable, but it's a group of the top 200 CEOs in America. They get together and they form policy and talk about kind of what the big trends are facing businesses and how they are going to lobby for this or lobby for that when it comes to talking to government. But in 2019, they reformulated the definition of a corporation. And so for 20 something years, the definition of a corporation or the meaning or the reason for meaning of a corporation had been shareholder capitalism, which is basically more profits for shareholders, right? We exist at the pleasure of shareholders. And then in 2019, they said, listen, we need to modernize this mission for corporations and say, listen, we are now here for stakeholder capitalism, which means we have to add value to employees, customers, the environment, communities, and shareholders. And when I saw that statement, I was very inspired, Michael, but I was like, well, how are you going to do it? And once again, thinking the same way I thought about when I was writing Leaderboard, well, that's a great statement, but really the only way to achieve those outcomes of more positivity for more stakeholders is we're going to have to go back and do the work of, eradicating injustices, eliminating inequities, expanding diversity, and enhancing inclusion. Because the way to all of those things is through how you treat your employees and how your employees treat your customers, and then your ability to externalize your business's mission for communities and for the environment. And shareholders are going to be okay because we make great stuff, and that's going to continue to happen. So we need to how are we going to externalize these benefits for all these additional stakeholders? The bar for leadership has been raised, and so in leading that bar, I wrote a very aspirational book, which is be a Jedi leader. And if you think about even in Star Wars, to be a Jedi is very aspirational. Like, it's not easy. And,
Right.
and I think that kind of that dovetails together very well. It's very pithy. It's great for marketing, but the intention has nothing to do with Star Wars. It's everything to do with how do we protect employees so that we can get the most out of our missions for customers, communities, the environment, and shareholders.
I love it. You said a couple things. One, I love acknowledging that being a leader is a lot harder. right?
Yeah.
It is a lot harder
Yes.
to be a leader, right? I'm in a leadership position in a fairly large firm, and it is tough, right? Because it's cool that we have, a book that kind of calls out these things, but I'm always looking at, is this just? Is this equitable
Right.
to, in our hiring practices and in our promotion and growth?
Mm-hmm.
Are we looking at diversity, right? Do we have the inclusion that we need?
Yep.
And these are things that weren't commonplace, right? Thus why it's important now for us all as leaders to take up that mantle.
Mm-hmm.
And I always challenge leaders, right? Leadership is hard,
Yeah.
right? That's why you're a leader. If you don't want to lead, hey, please do me a favor and get the hell out of the profession, right? Like,
Exactly.
because if you're just existing in the space, like we ain't got no time for that right now. We need leaders that lead, and leadership starts with leading from the front and
Yeah.
making changes and doing uncomfortable things.
Leaders need to start earning their salary.
Amen.
Because right now they're not earning their salary. They're actually in the traditional hierarchy of leadership, the higher up you go, the easier your job gets. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the people with the highest capability to do more for more people should be doing that for everybody. So, which is why I believe in servant leadership and inverting the leadership hierarchy. And now you are responsible for holding up this enterprise. You're responsible for the people who create value for your customers. And so you have to be in it for them every single day. Because that's the hard work. That's what it's all about. But that's why you're getting paid the medium to big bucks.
Yeah, I love that, right? Holding them accountable. And employees don't really want to work, right? It's such a weird place that we are in this hiring age. Employees have choices, and they are executing them right and left. So when companies call us and they go, hey, can you come help us? We have this huge turnover thing, blah, 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 and we go in to consult. I always start with, hey, what are your company values?
Yeah.
What are your, and people are like, no, we have a hiring problem. I'm like, right. I want to understand you as a company.
Exactly.
So I can understand if what you're saying and what you're practicing, do we have a disconnect, right?
Are you congruent? Yeah.
Right. Because your employees are going to see that. And if you say one thing and there's no trust, right? Everybody who listens to my podcast knows that I just beat the trust drum to death.
That's me.
Yeah. Because if your employees can't trust you, they ain't going to stay.
Exactly.
Right? They're not going to stay.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about how companies, if everyone's like, yep, this is right, I need to practice these JEDI philosophies. This sounds very cool. How do companies go about that, right? Like how do you help maybe like companies think about like, I know that we're not 100% there, but we want to be there. Like, what's that journey look like?
So the first thing is I come in and I actually talk about, first of all, we go through basic definitions and data. So, I bring them up to speed on, the definitions of JEDI and the data around why leaning into the spaces of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is actually meaningful from a business perspective. So the business case for JEDI is where I start. Because once again, we're business people and we're trying to, sell more widgets or whatever it is we're trying to do. So that at the core of everything we do, we have to have a financial reason for whatever we're doing and an investment that we're trying to make. So that's fine. I understand that. And I come in that way. But then we proceed to the 4 arguments for change. And so there's 4 primary arguments for embracing JEDI change. The first argument is the moral argument. You have the moral argument, which is just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, right? Then you have the peer pressure argument, changing because everyone else is doing it, or there are leaders that we aspire to be better, and so we want to, mirror ourselves off of some other company that's actually, progressing in this space. So you have the peer pressure argument, the moral argument, the peer pressure argument. You have the risk mitigation argument, which is basically when you leave injustices and equities, and you force conformity and you have exclusionary policies, you're creating actually tremendous business risk of lawsuits, of losing employees, of other sequelae you can't even think about right now. You can't even imagine that come in that space. So there's a risk argument for it, and there's an innovation argument for changing, which is the best, absolute best companies are able to not only innovate, but also to promote these policies. So the top 5 companies in the Just Capital ranking, which basically ranks companies on stakeholder capitalism progress, the top 5 companies all have trillions of market capitalization, are all growing over 20% year over year, and they're all doing the most as it applies to JEDI leadership within their companies. So if they can do it, there's no excuse for anybody else. And so that kind of gets things moving. So it was like, okay, so what's the argument? What's the right argument for your company right now? Is it moral? Is it peer pressure? Is it innovation? Or is it risk management? Or is it a combination of all 4? What's the right argument? And then we go about building a SWOT analysis for you based on where you're at. So basically, what are your current strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as it relates to making this change happen? And we begin to get really practical around how to actually start thinking about what I call the 4 Ps, which are your practices, your priorities, your principles, and your processes. And so basically within those 4 things, that's where we start. We start on those things. And so my approach to JEDI leadership is not kumbaya retreats. It's not unconscious bias training. It's not people feeling bad about historically who they are from whatever perspective. It's about modernizing our businesses, and there are 4 good reasons for us to be transforming ourselves, none of which relate to we're bad people, or we're these kind of things that are floating around in the air. I understand that side of it too. I mean, there's a reckoning that comes from all these years of discrimination and racism and sexism and all these things. That's a reckoning coming through that, and I'm happy to see people getting paid for those types of services. I just don't think that moves the needle in terms of business. And so that's why I approached it from this angle, having worked within large pharma companies around the world for 20 plus years. It has to be applicable globally as well. It can't just be a United States thing, so it has to be bigger. It has to be a reason that's bigger than past grievances, which are very valid for us to reconcile and recognize. And it's important for us to have those conversations, but there needs to be a more compelling argument, and that's what I present in the book.
I love it. One of the aspects of this weird world that we're in, as far as hiring, right? The Great Resignation that we kind of went through or are in.
Yeah.
And now all these employees are like scouring jobs, right? There's so many jobs out there, and people are struggling to fill them. We have positions posted, and we're struggling to fill them.
Yeah.
We have an amazing culture.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, people are they're really looking for the perfect culture, right? They're really looking for exactly the whole JEDI concept, right? They're looking for a company maybe that isn't there yet, but is actively on a journey
right.
to transform themselves. And I think it's easier for smaller companies to do that, right? The big companies of the world, the big pharma where you came from, large healthcare organizations where a lot of our audience comes from. It's not an overnight thing. It's not like, oh, I'm going to pick up Omar's book, I'm going to read it over the weekend, and Monday we now have a JEDI culture, and it's going to be great.
No,
we're talking about a journey.
It's a journey. And I tell people, don't get started. It's 3 years minimum.
Wow.
It's 3 years minimum. That's the commitment coming in the door. And it is, and each year the investment escalates. Because where we want to be at the end, the desired state of the end of this journey is being able to externalize that purpose and mission you mentioned earlier. So basically, like, we state these things, we exist for these things, or, every healthcare company, we live for patients, okay? For your patients to actually feel that from you, That's going to take 3 years from the day you start, from them to feel something different about your entity. So you're right. If you're smaller, it's much easier. If you're entrepreneurial, it's much easier. Now I know entrepreneurs are, they're one-arm paper hangers, and you're trying to just keep the lights on. You're trying to hire. You're trying to scale. You're trying to do all these things, and we tend to bolt on processes and all this stuff later on when we get big enough. But I would say, it will behoove every entrepreneur or person who has a startup or who's in a business pre-scale to take a week and think about these big questions. What is the culture that I want to establish in my corporation? What are the hiring principles, and what kind of people are going to be best at driving this culture? It should be a broad swath of people, actually. Um, what ultimately do we aspire to become whenever we become when we grow up, 10 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? It can't just be about going to get investor money, dollars, and then growing as fast as possible without regards to, the consequences of growth. It's sort of like, every company goes through growing pains, but when you get big, it's almost too late. It's very difficult to go back and fix, some of the problems. You look at Uber right now. Uber is still trying to fix, what's happened as a result of their rapid growth in the early 2010s. Right, they're still trying to adjust, their culture. And it's difficult to go back and do that. So if you have the opportunity now to start off with these principles, reading a book like Be a Jedi Leader, Not a Boss, or the Servant Leader's Manifesto, or even Leaderboard will help you now in the stage you're in now to help you do that in the most appropriate way possible.
One of the other, you see so many companies, right, and they have the best intent, and maybe they'll do something like hire a chief of diversity officer, right, which is usually a pretty unempowered position. It's look, we have a chief of diversity, and it's like the showpiece, right? And they wave them around.
Check the box.
Yeah. And those folks, might come up with a plan and stuff. Maybe they do some training. It's an interesting time because it's much harder. So we've kind of established that. I love your 3-year journey. When folks want to do this, I mean, to me, don't they have to do some sort of to me, they need a self-assessment or an assessment, right? And sometimes those things come best from somebody who's not in the trenches, right? Somebody like yourself to be able to come in and be like, hey, you think you're here? You're really probably here, and here's where you want to be, and let's come up with a plan, right? That's kind of sometimes hard to do when you're in it yourself, and having a third party help you might
100%. That's why all these consulting firms exist, because they are coming. First of all, there's 2 reasons to hire a consultant. The first reason is consultants work across a variety of industries. So that when you hire a good consultant, they're bringing experience, not just from your industry or company. They're bringing experience, hopefully, from across a gamut. If you hire me, you're getting someone who works in tech, who works with entrepreneurs, who works in government, who works in big companies, works in financial services. You're getting someone who brings a different lens to the work. So basically, your people at their best are only experts in your industry. So that's one reason to hire a consultant. The second reason to hire a consultant is what you mentioned before, which is just that fresh pair of eyes and knowing where to look. What I tell my clients is the first thing we have to agree on is you need to assume that there is risk. Assume there are problems. It's sort of like we're going to be, I call it my Jedi restoration system. And so we have to restore the house. So let's assume that this house has problems. I am your inspector. My job is to go into the house and give you a report on what I see via my inspection. So I'm going to inspect everything. I'm going to go through stairwells, electricity, water pressure, foundation, paint, asbestos, bugs and vermin. I'm going to go through every element of your house. And as an expert exterminator, I'm going to tell you, okay, these are your top 4 or 5 problems. And that's where the journey starts. I was reading an article last week that said that the title of the article was "More Americans have been through diversity training in the last year than actual on-the-job training." And it mentions American Express and how American Express has spent $1 billion or has committed $1 billion to changing or transforming their culture. And they spent, and everybody's going through all these trainings. And I wrote a post on LinkedIn saying, listen, in my system, as an exterminator, as the investigator, as the inspector, training is step number 7.
Wow.
So training is step number 7. Problem identification is step number 1.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we training? What are we training if we haven't even identified the problems? Training is in a corporate sense, is to reinforce SOPs. We train so that people can implement our SOPs, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
the SOPs aren't changing, there ain't no need for training. So until you change the SOP, there's no need to train. So how do we get to SOPs being transformed? Well, we start with problem identification. We develop corrective and preventative actions. We create a disciplinary matrix. That kicks off new projects and programs, initiatives that leads to new operating procedures. Now we have to communicate, train, and monitor. But training is step number 7. And so there's a wheel that we have to go through. So I think that people are starting in the wrong place. They're making the wrong assumption at the beginning, which is, oh, we don't have, prove me wrong. Prove that my culture has problems. No, let's assume every house has problems. Every corporation has issues. Let's open our minds and say, listen, this person's job is to come in here. And ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm removing the problems from your home so that you can live there comfortably and everybody can live there and have a great experience in this home. But if we assume that there's no issues, when you turn the lights on and you see the spider infestation, or your plumbing goes out, or whatever other thing can happen, it's your fault because you didn't take the effort to solve the problem in the beginning.
I love it. To me, that's just checking the box, right? Oh, we did diversity training. Check the box. All this, like, do you really want to have, the conversation or not? Like, one of the most powerful moments in our culture, we had a mastermind on just diversity and inclusion in our culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of did this presentation about how it's important to us, and we have folks from all different walks of life, and we're trying to create a space where everyone can thrive and have the same opportunity, feel comfortable, and just have a great career.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, we kind of said, so, what do you think? And we had all kinds of people facilitating, all different walks of life, all different nationalities, all different religions and sexual preferences and such. At the end, like, everybody was just almost crying, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were like, and we had people coming out on the call that felt safe and secure to say, this has been amazing, and I identify as this.
Mm-hmm.
And we had people coming out going, I felt this way at a previous employer, and I feel so loved here. And as a leader, I was like, is this an HR nightmare or is this a good thing? Right? I'm like, what is happening on this call? And it was just amazing, right? And it's like stuck with me as like one of the best things that's ever. And the call wouldn't end. It was supposed to be an hour mastermind,
right?
And like 3 hours later, everybody was on the call,
right.
And we had over 100 people on this call, right?
Yeah.
Taking your culture from checking the boxes to actually creating a culture that has that power. That's what you're shooting for. That's your 3-year journey you're trying to get to.
Yeah, and that's why it takes so long. And that catharsis for me, I would rather see that catharsis happening on a smaller, on a micro level to get to the macro level. So basically, in my system, JEDI is every leader. Anybody responsible for people have to aspire to be a JEDI. That's the aspiration. If you are a people leader, this is the bar. It's here. Because every person you represent, every person you're responsible for. That's how we, to your employees, basically in the pharmaceutical sense. Basically, if you're a district manager with reps, the manager is the company, not the CEO. The CEO is some far-flung individual 20 levels above that we don't even know. We see once a year or we hear from once a quarter. The company to me is that manager. And so until you touch the hearts and minds of every manager, in your organization, you're not actually affecting the culture, because basically
I love it.
one manager can be toxic, and so basically for those people, this company is toxic. And you could have 9 other managers who are great, but to that person, that team, sitting through that same experience you mentioned before, they're sitting here like, oh, this is great, but my manager sucks. I wish I worked for the same company as all these other people, because I don't work for that company. I work for the company of, toxic manager Brian,
Yeah.
And so that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to, there's all these micro companies within a macro company. And the micro companies are established by every single manager. We all know when a new manager comes in, everything shifts. So your life is only as good as your boss, about who your boss is, right? So that's how it is in corporations. And so you have to affect those individuals. And the good thing is there's a lot less of them. So it should be easier to touch them than to touch your entire, employee base. If you're talking about a 100,000 person company, you probably have 15 to 20,000 people managers. So it's much easier, it's much more attainable to reach those people than it is to reach, the other 80,000. And so that's where you start. You make sure that everything you're doing is going to land on those people managers and enhance their ability to show up in the best possible way for everybody else.
I love it. Yeah, that's such a great, just a great tip, right? Don't try to boil the ocean. Just boil the seashore.
Yeah.
So managers out there, right? We talked a little bit about the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
And then there's this great rehiring problem. Where everybody's like, oh, I got all these jobs. And, my mom always says, my mom's 85. Sorry, Mom. And she's like, I don't understand. There's all these jobs. Why don't these people go to work? And I'm like, yeah, that's a great question. I have no idea why they don't go to work. So let's start maybe with the Great Resignation, because that's kind of maybe on the tail end, I think. How do they navigate that, right? We've had so many people just up and leave careers, leave jobs, leave companies.
Yep.
I'm convinced they're all selling on Amazon. I don't know what they're doing, but they're making money somehow. But they sure as heck ain't working where they used to.
Well, we're not out of the woods yet, Michael. I mean, 4.5 million people left the labor market in April of this year alone, same as last year, which was a statistic that kind of kicked off the Great Resignation articles last year. So it's the same amount of people voluntarily leaving the workplace, and so what you see is, once again, technology, opportunity. These seismic shifts transform the dynamics of working. This happened in the 1900s when people were working in factories, and then the assembly line companies came out. And so basically, the factory companies began to go down because nobody wanted to work in a factory anymore, because they could work on an assembly line. They could get more money, get better benefits, get better pay. And so you always have these transitions in society related to employment. As things change, right now is the greatest moment to be a person who wants to make money in the history of the world. You can make money so many ways. I tell people all the time, there's a lot of ways to make $20 an hour. There's a lot of ways to make $70,000 a year. If you spend 20 minutes on TikTok, Instagram, any of these social media sites, you will see these so-called, side hustle gurus teaching people how to make their money on Amazon or as door dashing or at the gig economy or all these other things. So these things never existed before. So you never had to think, well, okay, I can go work for this company for whatever an hour, and have to deal with this this person who basically may have all these other isms, maybe racist, maybe sexist, maybe bi, whatever it is. Or I can make my own schedule, work for myself, and do my thing. And so people are making that choice. The issue is there's no growth with that. You're going to hit plateaus. So the issue with the choices being made today is that, okay, yes, you can make a certain amount of money, but you're going to hit a ceiling. There's a bubble in that as well. So there's going to be a bubble over there that's going to break. And then people are going to be like, oh, now we understand why it was good to come back in and work for corporations. You forget corporations provide benefits, they provide education, they provide a lot of stuff, a lot of other things other than just the salary you get for working there. And people are not calculating that when they leave a company. They're not calculating the cost of doing those things for yourself. If you try to get a health insurance plan today as an individual, you're going to be paying $700, $800 a month for health insurance. And so you never thought about your health insurance bill before because your company paid for that. Now you're worried about health insurance. Now you're worried about, so what are the costs that's going to add to society? When people, there's a whole sequelae of issues of opting out of the workforce. Companies do a lot of great things for employees, and people forget that. They just think about the dollars and cents, and they think about they think about it too narrowly. And that's why there's going to be a great rebound. Once companies say, you know what, we don't care where you work from. So once the majority of companies say, you know what, we give up. We don't care where you work from. If it's a white collar job, we just don't care. Work from wherever. Our headquarters is in New York. You can work in Madagascar and make a living here. Once the resistance right now is that companies are trying to. They have these large headquarters that they invest.
Commercial real estate.
They invested billions of dollars in them, and their CFOs are like, okay, CEO, either we get people come back into this space, or we tear the whole thing down because it doesn't make any sense. Think about Apple, who spent 10 years building that beautiful campus.
The round building, and now it's like 30% full most of the time. And think about being like the CFO and like thinking about that all day long. Like, man, like that would drive me crazy if I was a CFO. The money you're spending to maintain this thing that could be used in any other number of ways. If you just decide that we're going to go virtual, we're going to go hybrid, we're going to do whatever we have to do, we're going to change the model. And so I think that employees now are going to wait for companies to make that realization that they have to basically say, we're going to let you work from anywhere. Once corporations, make that, then you're going to see everybody come back in. Because it's hard to be an entrepreneur. It's hard to be a solopreneur. It's hard to be out here on your own. And not everybody's built for this. So, the people who've left the workforce, they may be able to eke out, make their $20 an hour, maybe it'll make $70,000, but there's a whole bunch of other things that come with working for yourself. I love it.
That people aren't anticipating.
Yeah. I always say companies that are like, well, we've got to get people back in here. It's time to fill the building back up. COVID's, we've got all these protocols and, we're kind of past COVID, which, we're really not. It's kind of interesting how somebody just threw a dart down and said, hey, we're past COVID now bring everyone back. Employees just aren't going to take it. The companies that are doing that are seeing the resignations go up. People don't want to work in your fancy building. As nice as it is, they want to be home with their family and be able to throw a load of laundry in between meetings or whatever. And focusing on their quality of life, right, is key to your culture, or it should be. If you want to, I always tell companies, like, I'm going to call you anytime you do something or create a program or a process or a rule or a policy that isn't about your employee and the quality of their lives and what they bring to the table for you. You don't get to tell me I care about my employees. Because I'm going to call bullshit on it, because you really don't.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And you need to listen, Mr. CEO or Mrs. CEO, you're making, 25 times more than what that person makes. So you need to be more considerate, because you need to realize that their life is not your life. The choices you get to make from your vantage point are vastly different than the choices of your lowest paid employee in your organization. And so, you need to be a human and need to remember before you became this master of the universe, what it was like to live as a human being. And that's why you need to basically do the right thing for people at all times. And yes, the standards are going to keep going up. They're not going anywhere. And yes, you're going to keep having to do all this new stuff. And yes, it's not going to stabilize. That's why you get paid the big bucks, because you have the capacity, supposedly, to manage that. That's your job. That's your job. And if you're not doing that job, then what are you actually doing?
I love it. Leadership is hard.
It's hard. I should write a book. That's my next book, Michael. Leadership is hard.
That's right. We'll co-author. I love
Leadership is hard. That's it. That's it. That's it. It will be one page.
That's it. Yeah. Open the cover. Oh, that's it.
And it'll cost $30.
Maybe 2 pages. The other page will have a mirror. One of those mirror pages. You can just look at yourself and go, "Yeah, leadership is hard, dude."
Exactly.
I love it. Maybe a children's book. That's great.
Yeah.
So managers that are, getting ready then to navigate this great reemployment, rehiring, they've got all these jobs out there and they're struggling, right? Maybe they're getting candidates. How do they deal, right? It's kind of like deflating to post a job and either have nobody apply or the wrong people apply, and you go back, you look at your job description, you're like, nope, that's what the job is. I got it right. Okay, I posted on Indeed, Monster, and Dice, and I posted it all over the place. It's on LinkedIn Jobs. I paid for an ad, still nobody's coming.
Right.
You start going, what's wrong with me?
Well, I mean, I think you have to look deeper than that and look at your company's. Does your company have established funnels? So just like, we who work in the entrepreneurial space have to create funnels to drive our businesses, right? So, companies need to have talent funnels. And, if you, and the question is, have your talent funnels dried up, or do you need to, it's sort of like drilling for oil, you need to have new wells. So basically, people are doing the same thing, expecting a different result. So they're like, oh, my talent funnel has dried up. Let's keep drilling in the same places, and nothing is happening. Open new wells. You got to open new wells. And so really, there are places you never hunted before that might be great sources of talent. Your own community around your business. Have you tapped that? What percentage of people who are in the community are working for your company? Or all your people coming from, far and wide. And so, there's opportunities everywhere. Do you have a funnel that taps into the top women's colleges in America? Do you have a funnel that goes to the top, HBCUs in America? Do you have a funnel in the top universities globally in, Europe and UK and Africa and Latin America and China and India? Do you have funnels in all those places? The reason why, and the best example of this in the world for me, is the NBA. I don't know if you like basketball. If you don't like basketball,
go Suns.
You might not get the example. But the work that David Stern did quietly in the 1980s to expand the sport, so putting funnels in Europe, putting funnels in Africa, putting funnels in Asia, putting funnels in Latin America, and just growing those and nurturing those funnels. Now we have a sport where a two-time MVP is a European, from Croatia. You have, one of the top players in the sport, two top players are Luka Doncic and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Joel Embiid, none of whom are American-born. And the sport gets better and better and better and better. And you get all this influx of all this talent from all over the place because of the funnels that were planted years ago by a visionary leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would say. If manager, it's not your, I get it. Managers have to fill in their workforces, but this is a bigger organizational problem. This is not your individual issue, manager. This is an HR issue. This is a corporate issue. Innovation, once again, the innovation argument, innovation is a corporate problem. And so if you're not getting innovation in, if you're not getting people in, if you can't even hire anybody, you need to find new places to drill and go outside of your expected areas or normal areas to find new talent. And you might need to spend more money on onboarding and training because people are coming from unexpected places, but that's a worthwhile investment, right? Because now you can convert people from unknown places into, people who work for your company as well and can add value in a whole different way that you weren't even expecting.
I had a guest on that had an interesting strategy. I love the funnels, right? Because to me, that's key. Universities are great sources. They love to have relationships with companies.
Oh yeah,
It helps them as much as it helps you.
yeah,
I love the idea of looking um, beyond just your local area, right? So we're in Phoenix, Arizona, home of the Sun Devils, go
yeah,
Devils. We have a relationship with ASU, but we have relationships with a couple colleges across the United States
yeah,
that bring us diversity and
yeah.
bring us different sectors. But we had this guest who helps startups hire, and he had a great point of view. He said,
Mm,
when you're talking to somebody and you're interviewing them, and they're interviewing you now as much as you're interviewing them, do I want to
mm,
work here? He said, if you can heal their career wounds, right?
mm,
So if they're a seasoned professional and you can find out, like, wow, yeah, I didn't like working for a big company. I just felt like a number. I just blah, blah,
mm,
blah. They'll tell you what their career wounds are
mm.
and then build a culture that can address that, right? Talk about how they're part of the family and how we have this family oriented culture, right? Address
Mm.
their career wounds and they're going to want to work for you.
That's
It's going,
it's interesting because it used to be if someone talked bad about the previous employer, it was a knock on you in an interview, right? Like
yeah,
if you ask them like, so why did you leave your current employer? Well, if you say anything negative about your old boss, the culture of the other company, whatever, you have to basically say, just wasn't the right fit for me. You have to say some platitude. You can't actually be honest about your employment trauma, and I think that's a really interesting way to think about that. I think it's important. I think we should be, we shouldn't penalize people for being honest about why they're
yeah.
actually with us. But it comes from a place where the burden of proof is always on the employee, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
always like you have to prove to me that you're a good person. If you say something bad about your old employer, you're going to say something bad about me. That's the way that whole thing worked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus me trying to really understand you as a human, what brought you here, and how I can get the most out of you. That's a whole different conversation than the traditional, interview process.
Mm-hmm. I love it. You know, servant leadership, when we say
Yes.
that was a term that really hit, the last 5 years or so, right?
Mhm.
People were like, okay, servant leadership, servant
Yeah.
leadership. I got to
Yeah.
get skilled in servant leadership. I got to do servant leadership. And a lot of people were very successful, right, at
Mhm.
learning kind of that mindset.
Mhm.
Um, now we're talking about JEDI leadership,
Yeah.
which to me doesn't mean servant leadership goes away.
No.
We're like frosting the cake with a little bit of complexity. That's really important. How do you go from servant leadership to JEDI leadership?
So servant leadership is the bridge, right? I say there's what's happening is you have antiquated leadership, which is
Mm,
basically top-down, ego-driven, power-driven leadership. That's basically antiquated leadership. Anybody who is trying to climb the corporate ladder, that's an antiquated concept. Doesn't exist anymore. There is no corporate ladder. There's a corporate spider web that you have to navigate, but there is no corporate ladder anymore. No one just goes straight up anymore. We all have to bounce around and do whatever, and that makes better professionals and makes better leaders. So you have, so that adequate leadership, you go through the cleansing process. It's like a cleanse of servant leadership. So
mhm.
basically, servant leadership reorients you. It basically gets your mind in the right place as it comes to why do I want to be a leader in the first place? Like what is this all about? Why do I want this? Why should I even aspire to this position other than more benefits and more money for me, which has been the reason for 100 years,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The way we got people to take this really hard job was to pay them more and give them no training. And then everybody, and I write about it in JEDI, basically, um, everybody just wants to get as far away from line management as possible, as fast as possible, because of how hard it is and how, you're dealing with all this stuff at that level. So, well, how do you get people to want to be there? Well, basically, embrace servant leadership principles. So then you begin to look at your job differently, and embrace your people, embrace the people aspect of leadership, and that will make you not want to just run away from those people that you're giving charge over for whatever at that first line manager role. Like you'll begin to love leadership and lead with love for those people. So then the question is, okay, so you begin thinking differently about the things that impact your people. And so naturally you begin having different conversations. You begin to understand, okay, well, you know, Jenny doesn't want to become a manager because she heard that in our company, female managers get paid 25% less than male managers. So she has no aspiration to be a part of that inequity. So I'm a manager with a high talented woman who could be coming up, and she doesn't want my job because of our policies internally. That's something for me to fight for at a line manager level. Or, you know, I have people. I have a gentleman on my team who I have, who wants to take paternity leave because his wife just had a baby, and he wants to be a good father and be there for his child. But we don't have a policy internally for that. So that's something I can fight for as a line manager. So the moment you begin to see something and not say something, but fight for something, you're beginning to become a JEDI leader because you are trying to remove barriers that prohibit your people from being their best selves. There's a lot of things when you start seeing it that way and having these conversations that are there, even in the most well-meaning cultures, that if you can move those boulders out of the way, even from a line manager position, you really begin to transform, life for those employees, and therefore you transform results. In my case, I had a leader when I was really, really young in my career. I had been relocated to Yardley, Pennsylvania, and my job was in Kenilworth, New Jersey. And my boss, he thought it was fundamentally unfair that I was going to have to stay in Yardley because I wasn't going to move myself closer because it was just economically inviolable for me. And so he basically fought. He called HR every day until they gave me a relocation, which to the company cost nothing, but to me meant everything.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was an impossibility. He made the impossible happen for me. I got a relocation. They moved me. I was 15 minutes away from my job versus 3 hours in the car every day. It transformed my productivity, but more importantly, it transformed my relationship to the company. And the fact that he allocated 1% of his time to make that happen for me, meant the world to me. And so that there's things like that for every employee that I've experienced in my own career, that if you can do those types of things, if you can make their lives a little bit better, the ability that the way they will show up for you and for the organization, you think you're getting results now. Imagine a company of people who have that feeling of like, oh, this company really has my back, like really wants me to be here.
I love it. So many people tell me, well, they can't do that, or, well, I've never seen that done. Or there's all this excusive language why leaders don't lead. And I just call bullshit on it, right? I rail against the status quo. Probably my boss probably hates it, but tolerates me, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah.
But if you're a leader, and I love your line leadership kind of analogies, because I tell people you can lead at any level, and it isn't title driven. You don't need to be an assistant manager or a manager. Wherever you are, be a leader, right? Personally, professionally, to your family, to your church, to your job, wherever you are, stand the hell up and lead, because now is the time, and we need every damn body in the pool, because
100%.
We're in a time of change and transformation. So this has been really cool. I almost want to play like some sort of Star Wars music in the background, but I'm sure that would get Omar and me both.
We will get into a lot of trouble. Yes, and we're already towing the line as it is.
we're dancing for sure. Yeah. Did we mean the Disney star? No, not at all. This is some other thing. Yeah. No, very cool. I love everything that you talked about. I'm such just a fan of leadership. Your books, all your books are really cool. I especially love the last one. It's so timely right now in the world. So thank you for taking up the torch, writing a guide, writing the mantle, trying to inspire leaders to be better leaders, to better serve employees and just the culture of the places that we work. Thank you so much for spending time with us here on the podcast as well.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the next time.
Awesome.